Do you find it challenging to get your paintings finished? Today I'm going to show you how I work on a series and finish 12. It's a bit longer video. I hope you'll stick with me, but if you want to skip forward to the end and just look at the final results, feel free to do that too. I'm Pat from Scrivener Art and Design in Parksville, British Columbia on Vancouver Island. I really love sharing my knowledge with you, and I hope it helps you on your creative path. Today I have these 12 paintings that I cut from a sheet of paper where I did 12 all at once. And I've mounted them on cradled panels. But I don't consider them finished, and what I want to do is look at the orientation and figure out what I need to do. So when you work on the full sheet of paper, sometimes some of the paintings look better when the orientation is different than when you did it. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and adding some more colors to these. And I'm going to work on them not all at once, but in small groups, probably of 3 paintings. So let's get started. I didn't write down the colors, but I think what I used is the azo yellow, some phthalo blue, and some cobalt blue, and some white. So I'm going with that for now, and I'm going to put some out on my palette here and mix in with the cold wax. So these were all done with cold wax and oil. I'm using Van Gogh and Winton, made by Winsor & Newton. So I used a limited palette on this and stayed on in the blues and the greens, and I may have used a little bit of red for muting down my colors. I'm using a little Galca gel with my wax. This is going to help it dry faster. So kind of like a third, I think I used a little bit less, but about a third Galca to your wax. And I'm just putting my wax alongside my paint. I'm going to mix it in about a 50-50 ratio. The Galca will also give it a little bit more gloss when it dries. It won't be quite as flat as it is with just plain wax. It also makes it a little bit more durable if that is a concern. So I'm just going to mix the wax into the colors. And I'm going to use this previously messed up paper to just continue putting leftover paint on as I go. So cleaning my palette knife, cleaning my scraper. So I can tell that this probably isn't the yellow I used, and I'm going to put out some more yellow here. So I've got cadmium yellow dark, which is really quite orange. I may have used some of the lighter yellow as a mixing color to get some of my greens. This is cadmium yellow medium. I'm at the end of my tube here, so just trying to dig out what I can. And it's kind of dry, so adding a little bit of Galca to that as well. Now I am going to tape all the edges of these so that I keep them really clean. And I'm just using the wide blue 3M tape. totally covers the side of the panel. I'm not going to worry about putting paper on the backs of these. I think that I can keep them clean. I'm not going to be moving them around too much. So I'm coming in here, adding some dark just at the bottom and kind of covering and softening over that orange part that was at the bottom. It was a little distracting, so just pushing it back with a more transparent layer so you can still see it. It almost looks like a rock up close. Coming back in here with some gold, some of the cadmium yellow. So this series, I didn't have any preconceived ideas when I started to paint on the paper with 12 paintings. But as it has evolved and I start looking at them, they really remind me of water and ponds, branches, reflections. As a child growing up, I loved going down to this little pond close to our house. It was by the railroad tracks, and it's where the culvert drained into the ditch, but it didn't ever seem to dry up. And there was always interesting habitation down there, tadpoles and frogs and reeds, reflections. So it was a place I liked to go to and reflect and just be able to be at one with nature. And, you know, the odd car would drive by, but they didn't really know that anybody was down in this little area in the ditch. So it was a little bit of a hideout for me, and I've decided to call this series Memories of the Pond. So I'm coming back in here and adding a bit more of a lighter value to the top of the painting. So one thing I am checking with my painting is the composition and also the values. Some of these are further along than others. Some, I think I leave the worst for the last because I know they're going to be harder to fix. So just adding some lightness to the sky area, and that area at the top almost feels like a tree line to me. So some of these I'll work on, and then I'll probably go back to more than once. And once I have them finished or where I think I can leave them, I'm going to then gaze at them a bit and see if there's any changes to make. So this one has a white edge on it where the tape was, and it wasn't quite 6 by 6 inches. So I'm going to bring the paint out on the edge. I don't want the white strip along there. And just bring this lighter tone across. So this is not pure white, but it has a little bit of green in it, just to soften it. It's really good to experiment making your own greens. different blues and different yellows really make a lot of different shades of green. You can also use black with yellow to get a great green too. I have used some pure black in these paintings that I put on with something like probably a branch to get them really loose and rugged looking. So I'm really trying to capture light and reflection, movement, branches. I am considering my values to make sure I have a good amount of darks and lights in my painting. So I'm opening up this black oil stick, and it's actually dried up somewhat, which is surprising. I haven't had that really happen before, but it's quite dry. So I just want to finish this line over to the side, and rather than mixing up a bunch of cold wax and oil, I find that just if I need a bit, the oil stick works really well. So I like turning these around and looking at them, and sometimes my first impression of the orientation can also change as I go. So don't get stuck on that if you're working on these pieces, and you can wait until the very end to see which way the orientation, and sometimes they work well both ways. So I've got a yellow oil stick. So I really like using the oil sticks on the top layer here and blending, bringing some highlights in, just fixing some areas. It's very fast and effective way to do this, and I use different brands of oil sticks, but I really do like the R&F pigment sticks the best. Okay, this one is giving me a little bit of problems, so I'm going to set it aside. That's the other beauty of having more than one, is you can just put one aside and come back to it later. And all of the paintings will start to influence your decisions. So it's really a good way to learn and to move your work forward. So finishing is always the hardest part of painting, and part of that is a discipline to get it done, and that's why I decided to record these 12 paintings so I would push through and get them done. Having a goal can be really useful in order to get the hard stuff done. The other thing that you can also do is just say to yourself that you're going to work on something that's challenging and difficult for you, that you're just going to work on it for half an hour, and set a timer and work on it for half an hour. Take a break, decide if you want to come back to it. Now I'm analyzing here again, and I'm looking at that white spot in the middle, and it's really kind of standing out, so putting some lime green over it. So you have to continually be asking yourself questions as you're at this stage of the painting, the final stages where you're trying to pull it all together. You want to be making sure that your painting feels nice and balanced from side to side. You want to make sure that you've got some darks in it, also lights. Don't end up all in the mid-range, which is oh so easy. It happens to me too. So try and push your values stronger. I mean, that's totally dependent on what you want in the end, but it does make a more dramatic painting. Bringing a little bit more of the oil stick into the top. A little bit of this goes a long way, and I've added that bit of yellow that looks orange, the cadmium yellow dark. That's kind of my focal point. And if you don't like something, it's easy enough to get it off and get back to the place where you were. I like working with old rags. I've kind of decided that I'm going to use my rags up instead of investing in towels, paper towels, or shop towels, just because I have a lot of rags and it's just a good way to use them, and I find they last a lot longer than a towel, paper towel. So coming in with a skewer now and some black paint that I put some Galkit in so it's a little bit more runny, and just scraping in here some random lines just to make it look perhaps like some reeds or grasses. Bringing some of the Indian yellow, sorry, I'm calling it Indian yellow. It reminds me of that, but it's actually cadmium yellow dark. This one looks further along as far as being resolved. So it's one that I had worked on a little bit earlier and then decided it needs a bit more light. This is the beauty of working on several at once too, as you can go back and forth and you don't get kind of caught up in the perfection. There's always another one to work on. So it's a great way to keep loose and keep going. So if being loose is something that you struggle with, I have a tip sheet on that you can download, and it's called 7 Tips to Loosen Up. I'll put the link below in the description if you would like to get that as a reminder to have on your studio wall. So one of the things I like for staying loose is not to use a brush. So even on these small paintings, I'm using the Catalyst wedge as a scraping tool, and if I want to put in some detail, I'm using small tools like bamboo skewers or my palette knife, something with a lot less control. Using the oil sticks is kind of fun. It reminds me of the playfulness of crayons and being able to just kind of scribble a little bit. And they also blend really well. So just coming back in here with some darks at the bottom. Blending it down a little bit. So let me know in the comments if you enjoy working in series and what your biggest challenge is when you're trying to take your paintings from that playful stage to being a finished piece of art. What do you struggle with the most? So again, using the oil stick and the scraper just to move that around. So the R&F pigment stick does come as open stock in some art supply stores, and it also comes in pre-made sets of various color combinations that you can buy that way. And I think there might even be smaller tubes, mini tubes. The one tube that I buy as a giant tube is white, and I have to special order that one, but it is the one I use the most. So I like how each one of these paintings has its own personality, but how they all hinge together because they've all been painted at the same time. First with the 12 paper grid on Arch's oil paintings, and I have a video on that particular thing. I don't think it's these paintings, I think it's a different set, but I'll put the link for the video below so you can see how I go about painting 12 paintings, getting them started by gridding off the paper and working on 12 at once. Just adding some of that orangey yellow for some accent in that, and this is kind of like the bonus color. So this looks like it painted itself. I've got white in the center that needs to go, but as I look at the back of this painting, it really feels like there's a tree line there. So I love how these random accidents become such a big part of the painting. I am putting some wax on. I forgot to do that, and I didn't mention to you earlier that these paintings need to be activated again, reactivated. So by putting a thin coat of wax on, it makes it much easier to come back in and be able to blend than it would if you just have the dry wax. So taking that yellow bit in the center away and making it, sorry, the white bit that was there, and making it yellow. It's still standing out a lot, so just coming in with some green, try to mute it down a little bit. Do make sure that you use gloves when you're doing this, because this stuff is just hard to get off your hands, the oil paint, and I don't think it's necessarily good for you to have it absorbing into the skin either. So oftentimes I wear a garden glove, just a really good fitting garden glove, but today I have on a pair of nitrile gloves, which I like as well. So it really is a yin and yang here, going back and forth on these paintings until they feel like they're complete. And when you put them all together at the end, you can usually see the ones that are stronger, and it's a great way of learning because you can analyze, like, why is it stronger? Is it because it has better values? Is the composition better? And then you can take what you learned from the good paintings and apply it to the ones that aren't as strong. So this one is particularly a poor composition in painting with that big white bit in the center. And I think when I was doing these initially, I was just really trying to push my values, but the placement of that ended up being in a bad place. So again, I'm putting some wax on here because I forgot to do it earlier. And you can just rub it in with your hands and scrape the excess off if there is. So this one's going to need quite a bit of work to bring it up to speed with the other paintings. If you don't have a catalyst wedge, you can certainly use the end of a spatula. You can go to a dollar store and find a spatula that the end will come off. That will work fine. It's just a little bit smaller perhaps and not ergonomic for your hand, but very inexpensive. The silicone cleans up so nice, and not only that, the beveled edge. So if you're using something like a key card, it doesn't have a soft beveled edge. It has a much harder edge, so you're not going to get the same kind of blending, but it's great for lines. So speaking of lines, I'm adding a few lines here just with my wedge. I don't really know where this one is going. It's not is not resolving itself as quickly here. So adding some dark values. And still not having decided really which orientation this is going to be. Now you can definitely do this kind of exercise, painting 12 on a paper with other media like acrylic or even watercolor, and then cut it up and finish them off. So don't think that just because you don't work with cold wax and oil, you can't do something like this. You certainly can. For this, I've used Arches oil paper. That's my preference for working with cold wax and oil on paper. So this is a full sheet 22 by 30 that gave me 12 6 by 6 paintings. And I've mounted them all on cradled panel with a 1.5 inch side on it. So they can look nice hung together, or they can just be a small painting on their own, maybe in a little gallery setting where you have a lot of small paintings together. That can be nice. So this one has definitely got a ways to go too. It's kind of wishy-washy. Doesn't have much composition happening with it yet. So I just made something that's kind of like a neutral, bit of a grade green. Putting in some darker values. It can be helpful to look at these on an easel as well. That way you have a bit of a different perspective than seeing them flat. So I put some solvent on there and I'm pulling it back and you can see what's happening. Bringing some more light into this. This is a Messermeister bowl scraper. You can get it at a kitchen store or on Amazon. It's got a wider blade than the Catalyst blades, and it's a little bit thinner on the edge, but it's not ergonomic in your hand, so I tend to go back to that Catalyst wedge all the time. Just coming in, bringing a little bit of lighter value up into the sky, or I'm saying it's sky. Could be more water up there. It's however you see it. So my goal is to keep these really loose and more abstracted, but let the viewer know that it is something to do with water, pond, reflections, but not put all the details in. And that's why I'm not using a brush. I very seldom ever use a brush with cold wax and oil. So this is another disastrous piece. Got a big white shape in the center. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that. Don't you just love how the oil sticks are so fast to cover things up? And one of the nice things about having a white spot like that underneath is we can get such incredible luminosity with the paint on top if it's transparent. So I'm getting rid of that little blob of dark up at the top as well. That was something bothering me. So you can look at your paintings and analyze them and say, what is bothering me? And get rid of what's bothering you. You can also ask yourself what you love about your paintings and try and keep it, but you have to be very cautious about that, because often when we try to keep something, it's in the wrong place or it's just not working overall with the painting. So don't get too attached to that, but definitely get rid of stuff that you're not enjoying. So again, on these, I haven't really decided the orientation of them. I'm going to just keep working on them and hopefully it tells me which way it wants to be. So you can see in this one, my lightest value is in the center where the yellow is. That's always going to read light. So I'm going to have to do some changes, and I'm adding some bubble wrap dots to this just for a little bit of texture. And again, I cannot get this one easily resolved. I keep twisting it around, trying to see where it's going. Mixing up a lighter tone here, and again, I'm very I'm very undecided about what's happening in this painting. That doesn't have enough contrast. I'm putting a bit of orange in to dull it down. So some of the 12 will be a lot more challenging than others. But don't let it get to you. Just keep on with your goal of getting them finished. Just blending that yellow down a little bit. Pressing the bubble wrap in again and just softening it so it doesn't look so bubbly. So a great way to break something up or interrupt it and is do something different. So right now you see me putting some solvent on here. So it's a solvent reduction. It's going to eat away into the layers of wax, and after it sits for a few, well, about a minute or more, you can start lifting up and seeing what it brings up underneath. So it's a good way to get a little bit of atmosphere. This works when you have a wet layer over a dry layer. If you have totally dry painting, it won't work well. And if you want to dig back to layers a long way back, you would need to use a stronger solvent. And for that, I like to use Citrusolve rather than the Gamsol. So mixing up a softer green here. So I found by making a video for you that it's made me accountable to finish these 12, as hard as it might be, and if I feel like pushing one away, but it gives me a challenge to commit and get them finished so that I can show you what happened with the 12 unfinished pieces. So again, another one that has a white center here and really not too much happening with it. So I'm going to go over that blue at the top. I didn't like that. Adding some darks, so really check your value. So you can use your phone to take a picture and check your values by putting it into black, or you can use an app, value checker app, to look at your values. Also, when you look at things in black and white, sometimes it shows up a lot more than just your values. You see problems with your painting. So I encourage you to take the time to do that. So just coming in, softening that center part there. Going back into the sky area and bringing some lighter blue across the top. Trying to not end up with a really strong horizon line, purposefully leaving some of the color up in the sky. coming back in here with some white, just blending in to get some light. Now this one's starting to take shape. I'm going to do a solvent lift on it as well, to see what that does. And a little bit of line at the top, just coming back in with a skewer. Putting a little black on it, just scratching in. This is a black oil stick. I'm just putting a little bit heavier mark on there in one place. Lifting the solvent off, and you probably can't see too much on the camera, but it did leave some bubbles on it where it lifted up, so changes the way the paint is, gives it a little more atmosphere. So adding a little bit of that yellow orange in places just to give it a little more interest. Coming back in with some white for a little bit of extra light. So it is really a game of back and forth until you feel like, well, until it feels right. The other thing is not overworking, so you want to be cautious that you don't spend too much time on one. Put it aside and you can revisit it later. But the longer you work on something, the more it's going to become tight and more detailed. So adding some oil stick again, just getting some new fresh color on the light areas. So I'm blending right on the painting. Even though I'm using white paint, it's not ending up being really white because I'm blending in with that wet oil paint. I'm just going to mix a little bit of light blue up here. And that's going to be too bright. That looks better. And don't worry if you don't get the color quite right. You can adjust that later. It's just a matter of adding another layer. Sometimes you have to let your work set up overnight so that it's tacky enough to keep working on it. But I was able to work on these wet on wet till I felt that they were finished. So I'm liking how the light is coming through on this painting, and I'm adding a little bit more dark. Even though it has some dark value with the black in it, I still want a little bit more grounding. Bringing my trusted little bamboo skewer in to scratch some lines in that area. Now you can use a knitting needle or a chopstick, various things. They'll work. Coming back in with some solvent again. So I'll set that aside to work while I ponder this one. So more color, more blending. So this has a lot of midtones in this one. The yellow is going to read it as a lighter tone, but most of the painting is in the mids. So I am going to push that, adding some lighter lights to it. Blending, blending, blending. That's what I do really enjoy about the cold wax and oil. Recently I've gone back to work in some acrylic, and it's just been challenging to get the feel. This one had a little bit of a white edge, just I think it moved when I mounted it, and so I'm just coming in and fixing that edge up and putting some darker color in here. Add a little more on this side for balance, so always check for balance. Visually put your painting in half, a line down the middle, either vertical or horizontal, and just take a look. So here I'm taking off the solvent, and you can see how I'm getting some reduction in the color and giving some atmosphere. I like doing this, especially when I'm doing water. These are little divots I made with a catalyst blade that had the notches in it, and I just filled them in with the darker color. So coming in here with some black in places, and I'm using a dental tool for this, so it just has a very fine edge, and I'm scratching some color into some of the lines that I already had in here. Just trying to give it an essence of some branches and reeds, twigs that have fallen in the water, purely from imagination. Just blotting that up slightly. A little bit of softening. Really on the home stretch now. Bringing a little bit of the orange in as a focal point. I forgot about the focal point on this one, so just adding a bit of that in. And again, coming back into this one, adding a little bit of the brightness. Here I'm going to do a solvent lift again on this one. And now I'm looking at this. It can go several ways. Coming in with that yellow oil bar of R&F. The green gold is so luscious and fresh. I'm adding white in, just again going to mix this down to give my lightest light, but not pure white. So I love mixing right on the panel itself, blending my colors through. This design was kind of like a cruciform, and although I don't want it to be like an abstract cruciform painting, I'm still after the feeling of a pond. I think I'm going to leave that dark line in the bottom, but just obliterate it there at the top a bit. So I need to take that solvent off this one now. And this is the beauty of working on several at once, that you can go back and forth. You don't have to be standing around twiddling your thumbs or tapping your toes while the solvent is doing its magic. You can work on something else. So I like how it did some reduction there, and I'm taking off this dark spot at the bottom. So you can think of titanium white as your eraser. It's very opaque and you can cover things with it, but I didn't want to leave a big white gap there, so I'm blending some of the green oil bar right into that white paint. Coming in from the edge. So this one is starting to develop with some nice light moving through it. And don't be worried if you lose your light. With cold wax and oil, you can scrape it back. If you're working in acrylic, you can let it dry and paint over it. Coming in with a little bit more black mark making here, again with that dental tool. Working upside down too often gives us a different perspective. So you will have noticed that I move my paintings around and around, and this is especially easy when they're small. When I scale up, I still like to turn them, but it's a lot more physical. So I did a little bit more work on some of these off camera, just when I put them all together and could see that some were maybe slightly weaker than others. I made a few minor adjustments, and I'm going to show you the complete paintings here one at a time, as well as in a group. So you can see they changed a lot as I worked on them here, and they're a lot more vibrant and more cohesive. They do have a focal point in them now. I hope you enjoyed that, and I would love to hear your comments on what you think and what your big takeaway was. I hope you'll give this technique a try and push forward on your unfinished and stuck pieces and make them come together and come to life. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back again next week. Bye for now.